It all began when a disfigured servant and the young daughter of a noble family secretly fell in love. Though they were only children, they cherished every moment they had together. But their happiness was short-lived. The girl's family soon discovered their forbidden love and immediately cast the servant out of the palace. Where he worked, they abandoned the poor boy in a freezing forest during deadly cold weather. With no money to buy even a bite of food to survive and no weapon to defend himself, the boy was completely helpless. That day marked the final time the girl ever saw him in their last moments together before being torn apart. The boy made a solemn promise. He vowed that one day he would return strong and wealthy enough to be worthy of her, and when that day came, he would ask for her hand in marriage. It was the only thing that could soothe the girl's tears, giving her hope that they might meet again someday. But things didn't unfold as they had wished. 15 years passed. The boy had survived that terrible day, but instead of becoming someone noble and admirable, he turned into the most feared and hated villain across the entire continent. The rumors about him grew so horrifying that people began calling him the demon. Sort of chaos. Simply hearing his name was enough to make people tremble in fear. Or worse, meeting him in person was something no one dared to imagine. On the other hand, the girl had taken a much different path. She grew into a beacon of justice and hope, known throughout the land as the Star of Righteousness and the Lunar Sword. She wasn't just one of the kingdom's most skilled warriors. Her breathtaking beauty was on a different level altogether. Her looks were so enchanting that anyone who saw her face and body instantly fell in love. Even after 15 years. She remained devoted to that same boy from her childhood. She had no idea if he was even alive. But she hadn't forgotten his promise. That was the very reason she never allowed any other man to come close to her. The scene shifted to the present day in a bustling inn. The place was packed with people happily chatting about their achievements and adventures. In one corner, a young man sat quietly, observing the lively crowd and wondering if this little inn was truly the famous hub for merchants and travelers he'd heard about. The young man, Jo-yoon, was a warrior with a spear he kept carefully wrapped. He was feeling pretty good, relieved to have made it to this place safely, and even happier because the locals treated him so kindly. Either out of genuine kindness or perhaps because they thought he was some skilled fighter. A group of adventurers invited Jo-yoon to join their guild and work with them, but Jo-yoon politely declined. He explained that he wasn't here for work, but for a personal mission, more like a dream to chase and a promise he absolutely had to keep. That was his priority, and nothing would stop him. Actually, no one wanted to stop him. However, a bald man in the group gave him a serious warning. He told Jo-yoon to be really careful while moving around the area. Naturally, Jo-yoon was curious and asked what he meant by that, with a creepy look on his face. The man explained there was a dangerous monster lurking near the village, a cruel, bloodthirsty person who hunted martial artists and carried their severed heads around to terrify others. Jo-yoon looked like he was impressed by the horror story, but the truth was, he wasn't unfamiliar with it at all. Sipping his tea calmly, he acted as if this was exactly why he was there. In the middle of their conversation, someone walked into the inn, instantly grabbing everyone's attention. And sure enough, it was the very man they had just been talking about, the monstrous, wild-looking figure with his infamous bloody bag. He dropped the bag onto the floor with a heavy thud and began walking forward. His presence alone was enough to send chills through the room, freezing everyone in their seats, everyone except Jo-yoon. That is, either he didn't know him or didn't care who he was. The others were terrified, only daring to whisper among themselves, wondering if this was really that monster the rumors spoke of. With an irritated look, the man barked at the attendant to call the innkeeper immediately. But the attendant nervously explained that the innkeeper was out running an errand and offered to help with whatever the man needed in the meantime. Trying to be polite, the attendant reached for what he assumed was the man's luggage, intending to carry it to a quiet room until the innkeeper returned. As soon as the attendant looked at the bag, he froze, realizing it wasn't at all what he had expected. Still, he decided to carry it, but before he could do anything, the man grabbed his hand, stopping him in his tracks. The room fell silent. Everyone watched in terror, thinking this might be the end for the poor attendant. With another chilling side glare, the monstrous man declared loudly that the bag contained his prey, and no one but him had the right to touch it. The attendant freaked out, trembling uncontrollably, and the only thing he could do was stammer out an apology for disrespecting him. This unsettling scene sparked murmurs among the crowd, with people whispering that this man was every bit as cruel as the rumors claimed. But before he could do anything, the bag suddenly started to move, and the noise immediately caught the man's attention. He turned toward it, his expression dark and menacing. With a voice that sent shivers down everyone's spine, he muttered an apology to his prey, saying he was sorry for letting it suffer, and that he would now finish what he had started. Just as his hand reached for the bag, someone sprang into action, stopping him in his tracks. That someone was none other than Jo-yoon. He didn't just dare to stop the monstrous man, he stood tall and fearlessly challenged him to an honor duel. The room went silent in utter disbelief. No one, not even the bald man from earlier, had expected this. Everyone was questioning whether Jo Yoon had lost his mind or had suddenly gone crazy. The monstrous man, with the new wound on his face, turned to Jo Yoon, his lips curling into a mocking grin. His tone dripped with disdain as he sneered, "You against me?" Jo Yoon, still brimming with confidence, boldly declared that he was here to confront the greatest enemy of the martial world, the one responsible for the suffering of every single person in the area. And of course, he was talking about this guy and not anyone else. He added that this was the dream and the oath that had driven him to come all this way. Hearing what sounded like a childish speech, the ugly, wild-looking man smirked before bursting into laughter loud enough to echo for miles. Letting out a heavy sigh, the man began to explain that not only Jo Yoon, but everyone else had misunderstood everything about him. However, before he could even finish his sentence, Jo Yoon cut him off, mocking him outright. It was clear Jo Yoon believed the man was just trying to make excuses to avoid a fight. With a loud clang, Jo Yoon slammed his spear into the ground, once again declaring that he had come all this way for one reason alone, to find and fight him. He made it clear that no excuses would be accepted, seeing how determined Jo Yoon was. The monstrous man gave him a glance, his expression unreadable, and said, "If that's the case, I accept your challenge, but I need to prepare first." Jo Yoon froze for a moment, shocked by what he had just heard, narrowing his eyes. He immediately jumped to the conclusion that his opponent was trying to escape. But before he could press the matter, the crowd erupted, yelling at him as if he had lost his mind. They all insisted that the infamous monster standing before them wasn't the type to run from a fight, in their eyes a ruthless man like that one, who didn't care whether his opponents were rogue or righteous, would never avoid a challenge, especially not from someone like Jo Yoon. The crowd tried to stop the determined boy, voicing their concerns and practically begging him to reconsider to them. But Jo Yoon wouldn't back down. He had sworn an oath, and no amount of fear or warning could shake his resolve. He dreamed of becoming the greatest, and to do that, he needed to defeat the most feared man in the martial world. Eventually, Jo Yoon agreed to give his opponent a short time to prepare, and the monster disappeared into a nearby room. At first, it seemed like he had gone to ready himself for the upcoming duel, but that wasn't the case. As it turns out, the monstrous, cruel-looking figure was actually Yu, the servant boy who had survived all this time. Strangely, he wasn't preparing to fight at all. In reality, he was desperately trying to buy time and find a way to escape. He hadn't come to this place to cause trouble. He had only come to sell his prey, which was just a small boar he had barely managed to hunt. There was no severed martial artist head, no gruesome trophies, just an unfortunate misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. You never got the chance to clear up the rumors that labeled him the most dangerous villain of the martial world. The truth was much sadder. He couldn't even use his inner power for a martial artist. That was devastating. He knew better than anyone that he was nothing more than a third-rate warrior, someone with the equivalent of errant potential. Was why people kept judging him based on looks alone. Panicking, you scrambled to find a way out of the duel. He couldn't believe he was being forced to fight just because he had kindly stopped the inn's attendant from touching his dirty bag. That one act of caution had escalated into a life-threatening misunderstanding. He didn't want to die, especially not in a meaningless fight with a guy like Jo Yoon. He'd had dreams and promises to keep, and fate, with its strange sense of timing, had something else in store. At that very moment, the girl you had been thinking about accidentally entered the same village. The commotion Jo Yoon had caused, shouting for the demon sword of chaos, had drawn her attention. She'd also heard the rumors and decided to investigate the source of the fuss. As soon as she arrived, she gently tapped Jo Yoon on the neck. When he turned to see who it was, his eyes widened in shock and disbelief. She removed her hat, revealing her face, and asked if he was the one planning to fight the so-called demon sword of chaos. Her striking red eyes, perfectly paired with her pink and silver hair, and of course her prominent figure, made Jo Yoon's heart skip a beat. He blushed just like the others watching nearby. Before anything else could happen, another man recognized the girl and exclaimed that she was the Lunar Sword, the direct disciple of the former greatest martial artist, who Jo Yoon assumed she had come for the same reason. He had to take down the biggest threat in the martial world. Determined not to let the opportunity slip away, he boldly declared that he wanted to team up with her in his mind, fighting side by side with her. And defeating you would not only be an honor, but also a chance to gain fame and recognition. Sua, on the other hand, finally understood the situation and couldn't have been happier. The duel and Jo Yoon meant nothing to her. What mattered was that she had finally found the person she'd been searching for, her lover, after 15 long years. She couldn't wait another moment to see him again. Her excitement confused Jo Yoon, who misread her reaction. He thought she was impressed by his courage and desired to defeat the demon sword. The misunderstanding made him feel like he had been chosen by fate, perhaps even as her romantic partner. He began daydreaming, suggesting once again that they form a strong alliance after the duel and travel the world together. Meanwhile, inside the inn, chaos was growing for you. he was still trying to find a way to avoid the fight, completely unaware of what was happening. Outside, he reasoned that reporting the situation to the authorities was the most sensible option, especially since dueling was strictly forbidden by law. He decided that as a responsible citizen, that was his best move. But just as he made up his mind, the end wooden wall suddenly burst apart, slashed open by a sword. Before someone made a dramatic entrance, the terrified boy jumped into a corner, trembling and trying to shield himself. And of course it was Jo Yoon. The sight of him made you scream in absolute panic, convinced his life was about to end. Before he even got the chance to marry Sua, crawling backward, you tried frantically to delay the inevitable. He begged for more time, claimed he wasn't ready. Was a private room Jo Yoon had no right to enter. Then unexpectedly, a voice cut through his rambling. Sua had entered the room and calmly announced that she had finally found you. The boy was speechless, whether from seeing the love of his life again or realizing she was the one who had smashed through the wall moments earlier. Everything became clear in an instant. It wasn't Jo Yoon who had broken the wall. It was Sua, using his unconscious body as a battering ram. She had made a point to show what happened to anyone who disrespected the Lunar Sword's beloved. Tossing Jo Yoon's limp body to the ground, Sua turned to you and began to approach him. She proudly declared that she had become one of the strongest martial artists on the continent and now had more than enough money to start a perfect life for both of them. And the money wasn't inherited. She had earned every coin herself. She stepped closer, gazing into the eyes of the one she loved, the boy the world called the Demon Sword of Chaos. But neither his infamous title nor his pitiful condition changed the way she felt. Without hesitation, Sua looked him in the eyes and asked him to marry her. Sua boldly declared that nothing and no one could stop their marriage now. Contrary to what outsiders might have expected, a dramatic, explosive clash between the greatest hero, the Lunar Sword, and the most feared villain, the Devil's Sword. The atmosphere inside the resting room was surprisingly calm. You ever the clueless one didn't recognize Sua. Not even when reminded of their past promise. He simply pointed toward the door behind him, suggesting that the Demon Sword of Chaos had just left the room. But with his face plastered across wanted posters, he quickly realized such a pathetic excuse wouldn't work. When she didn't respond, he decided to use the opportunity to escape, mumbling apologies and mentioning some sudden urgent errand. He awkwardly began heading toward the exit. Before he could leave, Sua gently took his hand, stopping him. You thought it might be the end for him, but instead of harming him, she did something unexpected. She removed his glove and placed his hand softly against her cheek. The warmth of her skin triggered a rush of memories. It was how he used to show affection, and though she was the one guiding the gesture, it still made her blush, just like she did long ago. She quietly asked him to say her name again. Slowly, his memory stirred. He looked at her and hesitantly asked if she was Lady Sua. The realization hit him like lightning. All the memories of their secret love, of being a starving servant boy sold to her noble family, treated with compassion and even affection by its youngest daughter, rushed back. Before he could linger too long in the past, reality returned. There she was, still close to him. No longer a young girl, but a grown woman, more beautiful than anyone he had ever known. Yet despite recognizing her, you felt deeply uneasy. Sitting that close, Sua broke the silence by asking why he hadn't touched his tea. Startled, he thanked her and awkwardly said he drank it, tacking on my lady out of habit. That formality darkened her expression. She reminded him of the promise they'd made. He wasn't to call her that anymore. You, nervous and unsure, tried calling her Lady Sua instead, but it still felt distant. Finally blushing and too shy to look her in the eye, he softly spoke her name and admitted he was happy to see her again. That single sentence lit up her face, transforming her into the cheerful girl from his memories. Her joy was evident. She smiled and replied that she was even happier to see him. The moment was overwhelming. Yu's thoughts began to wander as he tried to suppress wild imaginings. To distract himself, he pointed at her sword and asked whether she had truly become a martial artist. She confirmed it proudly. She had worked relentlessly to reach her current level, all for the sake of the one she loved. Though Yu didn't respond, as if he remembered the promise, the memory of him shouting his vow to grow strong and wealthy enough to marry her stayed burned in Sua's heart. Eventually, it dawned on Yu what she had meant. His jaw dropping in shock, Sua meanwhile assumed he had remembered their promise all along and was only surprised that she had remembered too. She recounted how she tracked him down, spurred by rumors of the Demon Sword of Chaos. That name made Yu visibly flinch, expecting questions or teasing. But Sua didn't mention it directly. Instead, she brought up the rumors surrounding the Demon Sword, harassing women, skipping meal payments. Oddly enough, all of it lined up with the behavior Yu used to display as a mischievous servant. Sua then took his grimy hand in hers and firmly declared that she didn't care about how the world saw him, whether he was cruel, hated, or a bit of a pervert. It meant nothing to her. She still loved him exactly as he was. There was only one thing: she wanted to marry him and start a family together. Unlike Sua, who seemed eager to bang our MC, marry him and start a family as soon as possible, he wasn't on board. He wasn't thinking about marriage at all. In fact, he was scrambling for a believable excuse to get out of it. He quickly claimed that an enormous debt stood between them, tying him down And for once, this excuse wasn't entirely made. Up in the past, he had tried countless times to become stronger paying martial arts masters, for lessons only to be kicked out after they deemed his potential worthless left broke. And desperate someone had once appeared offering him money in exchange for a future favor. That person was Han, a woman from the Eternal Bureau Guild. The scene shifted there, now revealing her dressed boldly without even lingerie, and introducing herself as one of the guild's leaders. Han was the mysterious benefactor who had given you the money he needed. Sua had come all the way here. After learning about her intending to confront the source of Yu's burden, based only on Yu's vague explanation, Sua immediately accused Han of exploiting men by paying their debts and then controlling them. Han, genuinely confused, didn't understand why she was being accused. The truth was more awkward. She was essentially Yu's sugar mommy, supporting him in return for borrowing his infamous title. Yu, meanwhile, regretted ever involving Han in his mess. She had been the only person who didn't hate him or judge him. She'd paid his debt and kept him alive with no real demands. Still, Yu believed Sua had the wrong idea, that she thought he had become strong and successful as promised. He feared what would happen if the truth came out. After they were married, imagining the consequences, beatings, interrogations, disappointment pushed him to make the dead excuse. In desperation, he dragged Han into the mess. She glanced at his dumb, pleading face and instantly understood what he wanted. With her sharp intuition, she guessed that Yu hoped she'd exaggerate the debt to scare Sua off. Sua demanded to know the exact amount he owed. Han paused, considering how high she could go. Finally, with complete confidence, she declared that to clear Yu's debt, Sua would need to pay 10,000 gold coins. It was the exact ridiculous figure Yu had hoped she'd say. He smiled, believing there was no way Sua could produce such a sum, especially for someone like him. He even suggested they all go home and think things through a little longer. To everyone's shock, Sua suddenly pulled out a massive bag of gold, so large it defied explanation. It might as well have come out of thin air. The bag was bursting with enough gold to clear the entire debt. Both Yu and Han stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to believe what they were seeing. Yu's expression turned visibly disappointed. Sua noticed but misread his reaction. She thought he was ashamed that she was paying his debt. Gently, she reassured him. Since they were going to be married, she said, there would be no more his or hers. Everything would be shared. To make it worse, she added that nothing spent on him was ever wasted. Her kind words struck Yu like an arrow to the heart. He felt exposed, unworthy of her love, and unable to run anymore. Meanwhile, Han stared at the mountain of gold in stunned silence, realizing it far exceeded what she'd asked for. She looked at Yu and saw a man being dragged unwillingly into marriage. With a new idea forming, Han decided it was time to take things a step further, one that might finally make Sua reconsider. Han slowly rose to her feet, a mischievous glint flashing in her eyes. Suddenly, she shouted for them to wait. Sua and Yu were just about to leave, but Sua turned at the sound of Han's voice, half expecting her to ask for more money. However, this wasn't about money at all. Han stepped toward Yu and, without warning, wrapped her arms tightly around him. It seemed she was either pretending or perhaps finally revealing the truth about their relationship. Stunned by the bold move Han had made, Sua's eyes widened in disbelief as she witnessed the scene. Ignoring Sua for the moment, Han leaned in and whispered to Yu that he shouldn't panic and she would handle this girl for him. But things didn't unfold the way Han had hoped. Sua wasn't going to let the situation slide. Her response was swift and fierce. A glowing sword appeared in her hand, and wild lightning crackled around her body. She fixed her glare on Han, her voice sharp and commanding as she demanded Han step away from Yu or be forced to. In that moment, both Han and Yu realized how serious things had become. They had only two options: separate peacefully or face Sua's wrath. As Sua moved forward, Han began to regret her actions, fearing she might have taken things too far. Meanwhile, Yu desperately tried to de-escalate it, explaining that it was all just a misunderstanding, but Sua ignored their pleas, still advancing and insisting that they stay apart. Her eyes made it clear she wasn't joking and might actually hurt them both. In a panic, Yu tried to appeal to her emotions, saying that she was someone important to him. Stay calm, Sua, you're someone really important to me. That single sentence seemed to work like magic. It stopped her rage in its tracks and brought her back to her usual self. Yu felt relieved, knowing they had narrowly escaped danger. But although her anger faded, Sua's heart remained broken. The idea that the one she loved had betrayed her with a sugar mommy shattered her. Yu wanted to explain that there was no love between him and Han, but Sua didn't want to hear his excuses. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the door. Yu ran after her, trying to explain everything, but she ignored him completely. Han, on the other hand, looked pleased. In her mind, things had turned out perfectly. Yu turned to her in shock. Though he didn't say a word, his expression clearly showed that hurting Sua was never his intention. Han casually returned to her seat and began talking about her experiences as a guild leader and merchant. To her, it wasn't a peaceful solution, but it was effective. This, after all, was the only reason you had come there: to stop an unwanted marriage. Still, he found himself filled not with joy, but guilt. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the village, the dark presence of the demon's sword of chaos began stirring rumors. Villagers couldn't ignore the aura surrounding him, but it was all in their imagination. He was simply walking by, consumed by guilt over what had happened with Sua. These feelings pulled him into memories of the past when he was just a servant, and Sua had shown him genuine kindness and love. He wondered why, after all his efforts, nothing seemed to change. Despite closing the gap in status, her kindness always felt just out of reach. Determined, he resolved to find Sua and tell her the truth. Just then, he overheard a man telling his wife he had seen a white-haired woman running through the mountains toward a cliff. You instantly believed it had to be Sua, and the thought she might end her life horrified him. The woman began trembling, and her husband assumed she feared what might happen to the mysterious woman. But her fear stemmed from something else entirely. She had just seen the demon's sword of chaos. He revealed himself and asked exactly where they had seen her. Moments later, he reached the cliff described. Gasping for breath, he looked around anxiously. Then, his eyes landed on a figure at the edge of the cliff. Believing it was Sua, he rushed forward and hugged her from behind, shouting that he would marry her if she reconsidered ending her life. To his shock, it was not Sua. It was a 200-year-old grandpa. The old man froze, surprised, then turned red with embarrassment. Misunderstanding the boy's actions, realizing his mistake, you quickly released him, turned away, and apologized profusely, explaining the misunderstanding. But the old man wouldn't let it go. As you tried to leave, the grandpa shouted, asking if he planned to walk away so irresponsibly. His eyes widened. The man wasn't scolding him for the hug, it was about Sua. He began speaking like someone who knew everything about Yu's relationship with her, as if he'd watched from the beginning. He asked you if he even understood what was reflected in that child's and all that yapping. His voice carried weight, anger, sadness, wisdom. He warned you not to underestimate someone like her. Finally, you understood. He believed the old man might be a divine messenger offering guidance. You turned to thank him and asked for more advice, but then he realized the old man wasn't even talking to him. He was addressing a nearby tree. Just then, the old man's grandchild rushed over, scolding him for wandering off again. He stood there, speechless. Nothing made sense. Yet the old man's words lingered in his mind. By the time you returned home, the sun had already set. He felt like the entire day had been wasted. Yet the old man's message haunted him. Just as he stepped inside, lost in thought, he was startled to find Sua standing there. She greeted him and welcomed him home, leaving him stunned. He asked when and how she got in, and she calmly explained that she'd found his house long ago, even before their encounter earlier. That day. Yu froze. He felt relief seeing her safe, but then he noticed the tears on her face. She had clearly cried a lot, though she denied it. You could tell, and he pressed her gently. Realizing how much she had been hurt, he explained everything about Han, making it clear it was just a misunderstanding. But Sua had already figured it out. She wasn't hurt because she thought he was cheating. She was hurt because he went to such extremes just to avoid marrying her. That was what truly broke her heart. He stood frozen, speechless. The old man's voice echoed again in his mind, urging honesty. For once, he didn't lie or make excuses. He admitted he truly couldn't marry her. Tears welled up in Sua's eyes. She apologized with a disappointed expression, avoiding his gaze, and said she'd leave. But you stopped her, placing his hands on her shoulders. She looked shocked when he blurted out, "No, that's not it, Sua." She had expected a sweet excuse, but instead, you started shouting that his income was only 200 yen a month. It wasn't even enough to feed himself. Sua blinked, confused. You continued, pointing to his shabby home and admitting he was only able to rent it because of Han's help. Without her, he'd be sleeping on the streets. He clarified that the rumors about him were false. He wasn't a hero or a mighty warrior. He hadn't even fulfilled the promise he once made to himself. Despite that, he didn't want to lose Sua. He begged for another chance like in the past and promised to work harder to become the man she deserved. Without thinking, he pulled her into a tight hug, proving he was serious about their future. Sua froze. It had been over 15 years since their last embrace. Yu's face turned bright red from embarrassment, but he knew the step was necessary. To his surprise, it worked. Sua agreed to wait until he was ready, strong, and wealthy enough to marry her. It should have ended there, but neither wanted to let go just yet. Then, you did something foolish. Acting on impulse, he lowered his hand and touched her inappropriately. Realizing his mistake, he quickly pulled back, deciding it'd be best to wait until they were officially married. But Sua clung to him tightly and suddenly pushed him back. He stumbled, hitting the wall. Before he could react, she moved uncomfortably close. You, blushing furiously, tried to stop her, but Sua didn't intend to back off. She moved closer, now face to face, and whispered, "Let's have the wedding ceremony in front of our future kids." From there, the two began messing around like any other couple might. Their playful screams echoed through the air. Meanwhile, a passerby overheard the noise. Not knowing what was really happening, he assumed the lunar sword had finally found the demon's sword of chaos, and they were locked in an epic battle. The rumor spread like wildfire, twisted, exaggerated, and reshaped by everyone's version of events. Eventually, word reached a pink-haired girl who seemed overjoyed by the news. She wasn't alone. Another woman by her side asked if she planned to act. The pink-haired girl nodded confidently, declaring that since one of the greatest stars had fallen, it was her time to rise and let the world know her name and the name of her guild.